What you're looking at now is a live view of the International Space Station. There's Kate Rubins while the crew sleeps aboard the Dragon on their way to their new home where Kate Rubins currently is. She's busy at work. She's got a full day ahead of her now with the Crew Dragon with a longer rendezvous time. She'll go through a normal schedule on board the International Space Station. We've gone through a lot of milestones so far. The crew on board Dragon now entering, in a pre-sleep period now, about to enter a sleep period. We just heard some of those final communications with the crew to make sure they were all set before their bedtime. They'll get a full 8 hours, at least an 8 hours scheduled of sleep time aboard Dragon before some of those next major milestones.
Yes, and so in terms of the Dragon capsule resilience, things are starting just to wind down. Activity is slowing down, but as you can see on the International Space Station, it's picking up as we get ready for docking. And the best people to talk to about any kind of International Space Station operations would be the folks in Mission Control Houston, and Sandra Jones is here to fill us in on what's going on.
Thanks, Michael. The teams here in Mission Control Houston are continuing to prepare for docking and Crew Dragon arrival. Ground teams still being led by Flight Director Zeb Scoville during this Orbit 1 shift. Teams in Houston are currently in the blue flight control room and are rotating and alternating flight control rooms from shift to shift to prevent contact between teams between their shifts. At this hour, the International Space Station crew is awake and has begun the exciting day ahead of them. NASA astronaut Kate Rubins is currently working on some science sample collections, and around 4:45 a.m. Central Time, she will move into her midday meal. Then around 6 a.m. Central, she will begin setting up cameras to capture the historic Crew-1 arrival and hatch opening between Crew Dragon and station, scheduled for just after midnight Tuesday morning. Around 9 a.m. Central Time today, Rubins has a rendezvous conference with ground controllers to review Crew Dragon procedures in preparation for this milestone. Afterwards, Rubins will get some rest and wake up around 8 p.m. Central Time. At last, it will be the moment we have all been waiting for. Rubins will be in the cupola of the International Space Station as Crew Dragon begins its approach initiation burn to bring it below the station and then in front of the station for the final approach before docking. Once the hooks are driven to form a hard mate between the Dragon and station, which is scheduled for 10 p.m. Central Time, Rubins will then work together with the Crew-1 astronauts of Michael Hopkins, Victor Glover, Shannon Walker, and Soichi Noguchi to equalize pressure to ensure there's a tight seal between Crew Dragon and the space station before they open the hatch and greet their new crew members who will become members of the Expedition 64 crew at the time they float through the station's Harmony module. This will bring the crew count on board station to 7. Everything's still a go on the station side for an on-time docking. For now, back over to you, Gary and Michael.
Thank you, Sandra. So like Gary said, the astronauts are just about to enter their 8-hour sleep period. We may have just heard the last official comms from Dragon to Mission Control here in Hawthorne, but we'll keep you updated and if anything changes, and also provide some updates, some mission highlights later on throughout the night.
That's right, and before they enter that pre-sleep period, again, that might be some of the last communications we hear, just to give the astronauts some peace and quiet during their sleep period. But in a few hours, we'll have some of the next major milestones. Not much activity going on aboard Dragon. We'll continue to monitor them, monitor the health of the crew and of the vehicle throughout the next couple of hours. But the next milestone we have to look forward to is not until 8:20 a.m. Pacific time. That's the boost burn, and that boost burn will raise Dragon's orbit to an apogee, or the highest point in its orbit, to just 10 kilometers. We'll continue our coverage here on NASA TV and SpaceX.com, and we're not going anywhere. In the meantime, continue to send questions using the hashtag AskNASA, and we'll be back shortly with another update.
Welcome back. As we enjoy some views from the International Space Station, we're going to catch you up to speed on what's happened so far on this Crew-1 mission and take a few social media questions as well. For those of you just joining, the crew, our 4 astronauts, are on their way to the International Space Station for a 6-month stint up there. We are going through a series of 5 burns that will turn Dragon's orbit to match that of the space station. 1 burn down, 4 to go. In terms of the crew, they're in their pre-sleep stage. They're getting ready to go to sleep. They'll have an 8-hour period. In the meantime, we're going to take some social media questions from you. We have one here from Oliver asking NASA, how long do the astronauts have to be in quarantine before entering Dragon to launch the ISS? And also, how often are they in contact with their family in space? So obviously quarantine is a big word this year, but regardless of COVID or not, astronauts quarantine all the time. It's part of the process, right?
That's right. The astronauts have always quarantined. For this particular launch, they entered into a hard quarantine on October 31st. A couple days before that, they entered something into what's called a soft quarantine, just a little bit less restrictions. But that hard quarantine, really, they've been completely isolated from contact with others. In fact, if you watched our launch broadcast, our pre-launch broadcast, you saw there was a lot of social distancing. All of the technicians were wearing masks. We just want to protect the crew members before they go up to the space station. There's a second part to that question. While they're there, how often do they get to talk to their families? All the time. There is a phone line on the International Space Station. They can call anyone. They can call their family members. They can call their friends. I've heard about some prank calls or someone ordering pizza for one of their co-workers' birthdays from space. All of that, they have regular contact with the ground because of these tracking and data relay satellites. They're geosynchronous satellites about 23,000 miles away from Earth, and they provide almost complete coverage and allow phone lines to call really whenever they want, as long as they're getting that coverage. These are fantastic questions. This next one comes from David asking, what are those beeps in the audio? That one's called a quindar. This is a classic tone that you get when there is specific space to ground, dragon to ground, air to ground, these communications. That quindar beep, if you hear that as a flight controller, that is your cue to shut up, because it's time to listen to the crew. Anything that's going through that air to ground, through that space to ground, is public. It's also highly important. It's communication with the crew, and everybody's captivated and listening in to any of those calls.
Right, and it's kind of almost therapeutic, and you're going to hear a lot of those beeps throughout the rest of this the sleep period here. Another question we have here is from Amal. I'm going to paraphrase here. How fast is the Dragon spacecraft traveling now? I can tell you right now it is 7.8 kilometers per second. And at the end of the day, it has to have to match the speed of the ISS. Sometimes surpass it, sometimes go a little bit less than that, but it is traveling very fast right now. But it is not accelerating or changing acceleration, so the crew doesn't really notice that right now.
Right now, of course, later, in a couple hours from now, we'll encounter some of those major burns, Michael, that you were talking about. We have 1 down, 4 more to go. About 8:20 a.m. Pacific time, we'll encounter the boost burn, and that'll increase the speed of Dragon by 9 meters per second, just a little bit faster, and that'll raise the orbit, actually the apogee of the orbit, to 10 kilometers. That's the highest point in the orbit, just that one next step to get ever closer to the International Space Station. This next question comes from Amal. Where do the astronauts store the food items in the Crew Dragon spacecraft? Michael, where do they store them?
Good questions from Amal. Another food question, too. We love answering food questions. So when you look at the internal views of Crew Dragon, you'll see a lot of white panels. A lot of those are removable, and that's where the food will be. And the best time to kind of check out and see where this is at, once we dock and the astronauts are preparing to transfer into the ISS, the ingress, you'll see them kind of stowing things away and pulling things out. There's a lot of kind of hidden spaces to store 12 meals and up to, I think about 14.5 gallons of water. Another question we have here is, do astronauts have any games or movies to keep them from getting bored when they have nothing to do? Is there Netflix? What's going on up there, Gary?
That's a really good That's a really good question. Thank you. Any games or movies, obviously, they have a large selection of games or movies that really they can just call down to the ground and ask for something. If they want to watch a new season of something that's able to be streamed, or if they have just a classic movie that they want to watch over the weekend, they have the ability to call down to the ground and have that sent up to them. In addition to that, they can also watch any of their favorite games. They can actually have the ability to stream some of those games up to the crew. They just pull up their laptop and they pull up a software program on their laptop that allows them to stream the game. I know for Demo 2, it was actually cool to see afterwards. We recorded some of the footage of Chris Cassidy. He was able to stream this coverage of what was the Demo 2 mission. I'm hoping that Kate has the ability to see some of those milestones and was able to watch the launch along with us as well.
Even in space, there are no spoilers. So. Please send us more questions to @NASA using the hashtag AskNASA, and we'll get back to you. We'll compile them together and hopefully answer a few more questions while we enter the sleep period here for astronauts. Please stick around.
We're continuing our coverage of the Crew-1 mission. 4 astronauts are on their way to the International Space Station. The crew is now what's called the pre-sleep period. They're about to enter into a scheduled sleep period for about the next 8 hours. And while they get ready for bed, let's recap the mission thus far. Launch day preparations started early for our crew members. About 4 hours prior to launch on Sunday, the crew completed their final medical checks before joining the SpaceX team to get into their spacesuits. After suit up in the NASA Operations and Checkout building, the crew walked out waving some final farewells to their family and friends waiting outside. Next destination for the crew was the launch pad. It was about a 20-minute Tesla ride to pad 39A, where the Falcon 9 and Crew Dragon spacecraft were waiting for them. 2.5 hours prior to launch, the crew ingressed or entered the Crew Dragon spacecraft, walking over that crew access arm and getting a last look out of those windows at Florida's Space Coast before heading into the White Room and finally the vehicle. 40 minutes prior to launch, the crew access arm retracted, and at T-minus 35 minutes before liftoff, the launch escape system was armed, allowing the Crew Dragon to escape the Falcon 9 on the launch pad or upon ascent should there be any anomaly with the vehicle. But it was not needed as we saw a smooth ride into orbit on Sunday. With 35 minutes to go until launch, propellant load began, filling the fuel tanks for those 9 Merlin M1D engines. And just 5 minutes before launch, Dragon entered terminal count, meaning its onboard computers took control of the vehicle.
And at 7:27 p.m. Eastern Time, 4:27 p.m. Pacific Time, the moment we've all been waiting for, those 9 Merlin engines ignited and Falcon 9 lifted off from Space Launch Complex 39A, marking the second time humans rode Dragon into orbit. With Falcon 9's first stage at full power, our crew began their journey to the ISS. Just after the T+9 minute mark, the first stage successfully landed on the autonomous spaceport drone ship stationed out in the Atlantic Ocean. And a couple minutes after that, we had spacecraft separation where we saw the Dragon capsule finally flying free.
About 45 minutes after liftoff, Dragon executed the phase burn. This is the first of 5 major burns required to raise Dragon's orbit and position it for approach to the International Space Station. Our initial orbit after Dragon separated from Falcon 9 was 210 kilometers by 190 kilometers. Those values represent the orbit apogee, or the highest point over the Earth, and the perigee, or the lowest point. That means the orbit isn't a perfect circle. We're going to see Dragon raise its orbit using the Draco thrusters over the coming hours as it chases down the space station. And it has been a busy day for the crew so far.
And speaking of the crew, this is the first time a full crew has been on a Dragon capsule. Let's take a moment now to learn a little more about that crew. Starting off, this is going to be the second space flight for Crew Dragon Commander Mike Hopkins. He's a U.S. Air Force colonel. Here's more about the Missouri native who's already logged 166 days in space.
Sitting on the launch pad is definitely a moment that you're always thinking about, right? That's one of the more critical phases of the flight, as you can imagine. You're very focused in, right? It can be a very emotional time. You're kind of pinching yourself because it's hard to believe that you're finally there.
Born in Lebanon, Missouri, he is an Air Force colonel and a flight test engineer. He was selected as an astronaut in 2009. He spent 166 days on the International Space Station, introducing NASA astronaut Mike Hopkins.
You know, it's funny. I mean, a lot of times people think of the dream of being an astronaut as something that a kid would have. And I remember when my wife and I first started dating at the University of Illinois, and I told her that I wanted to be an astronaut, she laughed at me and kind of said, "Are you serious?" But at the same time, she stuck with me throughout the years, and to have that dream come true is pretty amazing. My role on the Crew Dragon itself, as part of Crew-1, is the commander of the vehicle. We'll be launching to the International Space Station, and we're going to be doing a long-duration mission, a standard long-duration mission. One of the nice things about being on board the International Space Station is you have a lot of connectivity, believe it or not, with your family. And so I was able to call just about every day. My family means everything to me. It is the most important part of my life. My wife, Julie, my son, Ryan, my son, Lucas, they are just such a huge part of this whole endeavor. You know, without family, it just wouldn't be as meaningful. The partnership that we have right now with SpaceX, it's pretty powerful. They bring a lot to the table. NASA brings a lot to the table. We've got a ton of experience in human spaceflight. When you're out there on a day-to-day basis and you're interacting with their engineers and you're interacting with their trainers and you're interacting with the people that are actually building the rockets and building the capsule itself, you really get to establish the relationships, the personal relationships. It's not just about the astronauts that are on board, but it's about the entire team at NASA and SpaceX that it's taken to launch this Crew-1 vehicle, and we couldn't do our job without them.
Seated next to Mike Hopkins is Crew Dragon pilot Victor Glover, who has flown 40 different types of aircraft for a total of more than 3,000 hours, which helped him prepare for this mission, piloting his first flight to space. Here's more about the U.S. Navy commander and California native.
I saw a shuttle launch when I was in elementary school, and I thought I really want to fly that. And that's where it began.
He is a Navy commander, a naval aviator, and a test pilot. He was selected as an astronaut in 2013. This is his first space flight. Introducing NASA astronaut Victor Glover.
First and foremost, I'm just grateful to God and to my family. To work and live in space is just a humbling and amazing blessing in and of itself. This is a test pilot's dream. Flying has been such an important part of my professional life, and I love to do it. 64,000 feet, that's the highest up I've ever been above the ground. And so to get to a point beyond that, that'll be a little special moment. I'm a rookie astronaut. I'm the pilot and going to be learning the ropes from a very experienced crew. Trying to balance that, enjoying and living in the moment, but also managing the responsibilities to make sure that we get to space safely. I'm looking forward to that juxtaposition of emotion, I think.
Tell me about how you ended up here. I think for every astronaut, that's kind of a different story.
Ooh, wow, that goes way back. So high school athlete, loved being a part of a small high-performing team, wrestling and football. Was fortunate to wrestle in college while pursuing my engineering education. I actually originally wanted to be a Navy SEAL. That's what started my journey in the Navy, and I wound up deciding to go into aviation and learn to fly. The love of flying and being a part of a small, very specialized, high-performing team that gets to do things in really interesting and challenging environments. The astronaut corps is the epitome of that.
This is truly an exciting time for human spaceflight in our nation, and believe me, it's only going to get better as we charge off into the future.
We've been working with our partner SpaceX for years. It's just been amazing to learn about the vehicle and to just spend time getting to know their flight control team and their trainers. It's creating sort of a new culture that is some kind of a balance between the two. The fact that it takes thousands of people all over the world to get us ready, it's humbling and overwhelming, and I want to do my best because I represent them. So thank you for your support and for your love, and know that you're flying with us on Crew-1.
And to Victor's right, in seat number 1 today, is Crew-1 mission specialist Dr. Shannon Walker, who flew flew previously on the Russian Soyuz, spending 163 days in space. Here's more on Dr. Walker, who will be the first woman to fly in a commercial orbital mission.
I always wanted to be an astronaut. I just turned 4 when we first landed on the moon, and I have very distinct memory of my parents taking me and my older sister out into the backyard, and the moon was rising over our house, and they pointed up there and said, "We have people there." And even at 4, I thought that just sounded like the best idea ever.
We have been given the scientific knowledge, the technical ability, and the materials to pursue the exploration of the universe. To ignore these great resources would be a corruption of a God-given ability.
I had seen a new class of astronauts that had been hired for the space shuttle, and I was reading in the newspaper what their qualifications were, and just going through some of them, I realized I can do that, and that was a big turning point. I'm Dr. Shannon Walker, NASA astronaut, and I am getting ready to fly on the Crew-1 mission to the International Space Station. Crew-1 is the first operational mission of the Crew-Dragon vehicle to the International Space Station. I was not expecting the call to be assigned, and so anytime you get a flight assignment, it's tremendously exciting. I spent 6 months on the station previously in 2010, and I am so looking forward to getting back there and having another 6 months on the space station. There are so many things that you could do on station. What I like about it is every day really is different. You get up and you may be doing a biological experiment one day, you may be doing maintenance on equipment the next day, and then the day following that you'll be doing some sort of experiment in chemistry. What I have found being part of the International Space Station program, and not just Russia, but our colleagues in Japan and Europe and Canada, is that underneath it all, we all have the same goals and we all have the same passions. The Dragon spacecraft represents to me is just a continuing evolution of better computing power that's evolved over the years, and different ways that the crew can interact with the spacecraft. SpaceX is a very interesting company. There are so many young people. I always imagine it to be like it was in the early Apollo days at NASA, with so many young engineers so passionate about what they are doing. The important thing is we both have learned from each other, and now we've got a very strong bond on what we want to accomplish and how we need to accomplish it together. I do believe that human spaceflight is an imperative for our planet, and to be a part of that, to keep the progress growing, I find very inspiring.
Crew-1 mission specialist Soichi Noguchi has spent 177 days in space, and this will be his 3rd mission in an orbital spacecraft. Here's more on the first international partner to fly aboard Crew-Dragon.
Soichi appears to be a very quiet person, and yet he comes out with some fantastic one-liners.
Soichi is probably the quietest, but he is probably the funniest as well.
Earlier, I used the word dignified to describe him, but his humor is very dry and subtle, but it is extremely witty, and it just makes it that much more funny.
Konnichiwa. My name is Soichi Noguchi. I am Mission Specialist 1 on Crew-1 mission to International Space Station. Well, my mission will be help support commander and the pilot on Crew-Dragon. And of course, once I arrive on the space station, I'll be a board engineer and do lots of science and maintenance and spacewalks, robotics, all kinds of work. I'm really fortunate enough to have a good crew member. And obviously we have a lot of a different background, and the diversity definitely gives us a great rigidity to our crew. I wanted to be an astronaut for a long time. High school days, I watched the shuttle launch. I studied aerodynamics and aerospace engineering. When I turned 30, Japanese Space Agency started recruiting another astronaut class. I was fortunate enough to be selected and sent immediately to Johnson Space Center. My first flight was 2005. That was on the Space Shuttle Discovery, STS-114. And the next flight was 2009. That was on the Russian Soyuz. The vehicle is definitely like And the next flight was 2009. That was on the Russian Soyuz. The vehicle is definitely like